Air travel is by far the safest mode of transportation, but it has not always been this safe. There have been a number of major air crashes and accidents involving commercial flights, since the birth of air travel. As flight travel expanded and the carrying capacity of flights increased, so too did the casualties from accidents. What is important to note is that each disaster ushered in new developments and standardizations in aviation safety and technology, making it the safest mode of travel today. Here are 11 of the world's deadliest air crashes that were caused by mechanical failure, human error, or climatic conditions. Before we start, make sure to hit the like button. And if you are new here, subscribe us for upcoming videos. 11. Turkish Airlines Flight 981. Turkish Airlines Flight 981 was a scheduled flight from Istanbul Yeşilköy Airport to London Heathrow Airport, with an intermediate stop at Orly Airport in Paris. On the 3rd of March 1974, the McDonnell Douglas DC-10 operating the flight crashed into the Ermenonville forest, outside Paris, killing all 346 people on board. The crash was also known as the Ermenonville Air Disaster. Flight 981 was the deadliest plane crash in aviation history until the 27th of March 1977, when 583 people perished in the collision of two Boeing 747s in Tenerife. It remained the deadliest single aircraft accident until the crash of Japan Airlines Flight 123 on the 12th of August 1985, and the deadliest aviation accident without survivors until the Charkhai Midair collision on the 12th of November 1996. It remains the deadliest single aircraft accident without survivors, the first fatal and deadliest crash involving the McDonnell Douglas DC-10, and the deadliest aviation accident to occur in France. The crash occurred when an incorrectly secured cargo door at the rear of the plane burst open and broke off, causing an explosive decompression that severed critical cables necessary to control the aircraft. 10. The Tenerife Airport Disaster. On March 27, 1977, two Boeing 747 passenger jets, operating KLM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736, collided on the runway at Los Rodeos Airport on the Spanish island of Tenerife. Resulting in 583 fatalities, this accident is the deadliest in aviation history. A terrorist incident at Gran Canaria Airport had caused many flights to be diverted to Los Rodeos, including the two aircraft involved in the accident. The airport quickly became congested with parked airplanes blocking the only taxiway and forcing departing aircraft to taxi on the runway instead. Patches of thick fog were drifting across the airfield, hence visibility was greatly reduced for pilots and the control tower. The collision occurred when the KLM airliner initiated its takeoff run while the Pan Am airliner, shrouded in fog, was still on the runway and about to turn off onto the taxiway. The impact and resulting fire killed everyone on board KLM 4805 and most of the occupants of Pan Am 1736, with only 61 survivors in the front section of the aircraft. 9. American Airlines Flight 191. American Airlines Flight 191 was a regularly scheduled domestic passenger flight in the United States operated by American Airlines from O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, Illinois, to Los Angeles International Airport in Los Angeles, California. On the afternoon of Friday, May 25, 1979, the McDonnell Douglas DC-1010 operating this flight was taking off from runway 32R when its left engine detached, causing loss of control, and it crashed less than a mile, 1.6 kilometers, from the end of the runway. All 258 passengers and 13 crew on board were killed, along with 2 people on the ground. With 273 fatalities, it is the deadliest aviation accident to have occurred in the United States. 8. Saudi Flight 163. Was this one of the saddest plane incidents? This was not a case of a crash or a mid-air collision, but sadly, all 301 passengers on board the Lockheed L-1011 died on the runway at Riyadh due to smoke inhalation. So, what happened? On the 19th of August 1980, Saudi Flight 163 took off from Riyadh, en route to Jeddah, only to return to Riyadh minutes later for an emergency landing after a fire started in the cargo department. However, when the plane landed, instead of initiating an emergency evacuation, the pilot taxied the aircraft back towards the airport, stopping on the runway for nearly 3 minutes. It then took some 23 minutes to access the aircraft once the engines were stopped. By the time the doors were opened, all on board had died from smoke inhalation. The source of the fire is believed to have been 2 butane stoves in the cargo, and evacuation was never initiated. 7. Air India Flight 182. In the early morning hours of June 23, 1985, Air India Flight 182 approached the west coast of Ireland. The flight began in Toronto, receiving passengers and luggage from connecting flights, and picking up more in Mirabel, Quebec. Children of all ages were joined by their families, looking forward to visiting their loved ones and friends in India. Most of the passengers were Canadians. Unbeknownst to them, in the weeks prior to that flight, a group of Canadians had been planning to blow up the plane. The conspiracy was based in radical sections of the Sikh community in Vancouver and elsewhere who were pursuing the goal of an independent country, to be called Khalistan, in the northwestern province of Punjab in India. As a result of this conspiracy, a bomb was manufactured, placed in a suitcase, and taken to the Vancouver airport, where on June 22, 1985, it was checked through on a flight from Vancouver to Toronto. In Toronto, the lethal suitcase made its way onboard Air India Flight 181, which then stopped at Mirabel and became Air India Flight 182, en route to London and Delhi. At approximately 12:14 a.m., on June 23, 1985, the timer on the bomb detonated a charge and blew open a hole in the left aft fuselage of the plane. The aircraft, which bore the name Kanishka, was blown apart, falling approximately 31,000 feet below into the Atlantic Ocean off the southwest coast of Ireland. The children going to visit grandparents, young tourists looking forward to their first experience of India, women and men of all ages, flight attendants and pilots, in short all 329 passengers and crew were killed. It was, at that point, and up until 9/11, the worst act of terrorism against the traveling public in world history. 6. Japan Airlines Flight 123. Japan Airlines Flight 123 was a scheduled domestic Japan Airlines passenger flight from Tokyo's Haneda Airport to Osaka International Airport, Japan. On August 12, 1985, a Boeing 747SR operating this route suffered a sudden decompression 12 minutes into the flight and crashed in the area of Mount Takamagahara, Ueno, Gunma Prefecture, 100 kilometers, 62 miles, 54 nautical miles, from Tokyo 32 minutes later. The crash site was on Osataka Ridge, near Mount Osataka. Japan's Aircraft Accident Investigation Commission officially concluded that the rapid decompression was caused by a faulty repair by Boeing technicians after a tailstrike incident during a landing at Osaka Airport in 1978. The rear bulkhead of the plane had been repaired with an improperly installed doubler plate, compromising the plane's airworthiness. Cabin pressurization continued to expand and contract the improperly repaired bulkhead until the day of the accident, when the faulty repair failed, causing a rapid decompression that ripped off a large portion of the tail and caused the loss of hydraulic controls to the entire plane. The aircraft, configured with increased economy class seating, was carrying 524 people. Casualties of the crash included all 15 crew members and 505 of the 509 passengers. Some of the passengers survived the initial crash but died of their injuries hours later while awaiting rescue. 5. Iran Air Flight 655. On July 3, 1988, the Airbus A300, a civilian airline, was shot down by surface-to-air missiles fired from U.S. military cruiser USS Vincennes, killing all on board. The flight was in Iranian airspace, over Iranian territorial waters and on its usual flight path, yet, according to the U.S. government, Vincennes mistook it for an F-14A Tomcat fighter plane. Crew on the American ship made 10 attempts to contact the Iran Air aircraft on military and civilian radio frequencies, with no response, before firing. In 1996, the U.S. government and Iran reached a settlement at the International Court of Justice, the former expressing deep regret over the loss of lives, but not admitting legal liability or formally apologizing. The U.S. agreed to pay $213,103.45 compensation per passenger. 4. Charkhai Dadri Midair Collision. This is the world's deadliest midair crash that involved Saudia Flight 763 and Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907 over the city of Charkhai Dadri in northern India. On November 12, 1996, the Saudia-operated Boeing 747 was bound for Dawah from Delhi, while the Kazakhstan Airlines Ilyushin E-76 was bound for Indira Airport from Shymkent when they collided, killing 312 people on board the former and 37 on the latter. The crash occurred after the Ilyushin aircraft was cleared to descend to 15,000 feet, but then descended past that level to 14,500 feet while the 747 was ascending in the opposite direction. By the time the air traffic controller could warn of the proximity between the two aircraft, it was too late. The tail of the Kazakhstan plane cut through the Saudia wing, causing the aircraft to go into a rapidly descending spiral, while the Ilyushin entered a gentler but still fast and uncontrolled descent. The captain of a passing U.S. Air Force aircraft saw the crash and described a large cloud lit up with an orange glow. A number of factors were found to have caused the crash, including the failure of the Kazakhstan Airlines pilot to follow the ATC instructions. 3. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, also known as MH370 or MAS370, was a scheduled international passenger flight operated by Malaysia Airlines that disappeared on March 8, 2014 while flying from Kuala Lumpur International Airport to its planned destination, Beijing Capital International Airport. The crew of the Boeing 777-200ER aircraft last communicated with Air Traffic Control, ATC, around 38 minutes after takeoff when the flight was over the South China Sea. The aircraft was lost from ATC radar screens minutes later but was tracked by military radar for another hour, deviating westwards from its planned flight path, crossing the Malay Peninsula and Andaman Sea. It left radar range 200 nautical miles northwest of Penang Island in northwestern peninsular Malaysia. With all 227 passengers and 12 crew aboard presumed dead, the disappearance of Flight 370 was the deadliest incident involving a Boeing 777 and the deadliest in Malaysia Airlines history until it was surpassed in both regards by Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, which was shot down while flying over conflict-stricken eastern Ukraine 4 months later. The combined loss caused significant financial problems for Malaysia Airlines, which was renationalized by the Malaysian government as Malaysian Airways in December 2014. 2. The 2003 Iran Ilyushin Il-76 crash. The 2003 Iran Ilyushin Il-76 crash occurred on 19 February 2003, when an Ilyushin Il-76 crashed in mountainous terrain near Kerman in Iran. The Aerospace Force of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps aircraft, registration 15-2280, was flying from Zahedan to Kerman when it crashed 35 kilometers southeast of Kerman. The aircraft was carrying members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, a special force that is independent from the Iranian army, on an unknown mission. Strong winds were reported in the region of the crash when the aircraft disappeared from the radar screens. Approximately at the same time, villagers in the area described hearing a loud explosion. There were no survivors among the 275 occupants on board the aircraft. 1. Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, MH17, was a scheduled passenger flight from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur that was shot down on 17 July 2014 while flying over eastern Ukraine. All 283 passengers and 15 crew were killed. Contact with the aircraft, a Boeing 777-200ER, was lost when it was about 50 kilometers from the Ukraine-Russia border, and wreckage of the aircraft fell near Rybov in Donetsk Oblast, Ukraine, 40 kilometers from the border. It was Malaysia Airlines' second aircraft loss during 2014, after the disappearance of Flight 370 on 8 March. The shoot-down occurred in the war in Donbass, during the battle in Shakhtarsk Rayon, in an area controlled by pro-Russian rebels. The Ukrainian Air Force had suffered losses from increasingly sophisticated air defense weaponry. Immediately after contact with the aircraft was lost, the rebel militia in Donetsk claimed to have shot down a Ukrainian An-26 military transport airplane. When it became apparent that the wreckage that fell near Rybov was from a civilian airliner, the separatists withdrew this claim and denied shooting down any aircraft. So, that is the wrap of 11 of the world's deadliest air crashes. How is the list? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, thank you for watching and I will see you in the next video.